80% of the students who graduate from a University of Alaska program, whether it's at UAF, UAA, or UAS, or any of our community campuses, 80% are living and working in the state 1 year after. 75% stay long-term. If a student goes outside the school, only 25% come back. This institution is Alaska's workforce solution from VOTEC all the way up through professional degrees, bar none.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is the president of the University of Alaska System, Pat Pitney. Growing up in Montana, she started shooting guns at a very early age, and at age 18, she won a gold medal at the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles, becoming the first Olympic champion in air rifle for women. She competed on the international circuit until 1988, when she married an Alaskan, relocated to Fairbanks, and started a family. She began work at the university shortly after, and 34 years later, she'll be retiring from the university system as its president this May. In 2014, she became the director of the Office of Management and Budget for Governor Bill Walker. She oversaw state finances at a particularly turbulent time in our history, and we discussed that time today, as well as efforts to reform Alaska's healthcare system. Pat Pitney, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So let's talk about your early life. You were born in Montana.
I was in Billings.
And what was your childhood like?
Just suburban America, a neighborhood, but very close family. Whatever we did, we all did together. So, and I was the youngest of four. So whatever we did, I started 4 years younger than my brothers and sisters. So skiing, I started at 5. Shooting, I started at 9. Baseball, I started at 5. But swimming and just very active. Spent a lot of time in the mountains. Our family vacations were backpacking trips.
When the shooting started at 9, was it just assumed that you were going to learn to shoot a gun?
No. Well, yes, but I learned to shoot a gun way earlier than that. But at 9, it was on the competitive track. And it was just because that was the family activity that we were doing at the time. So my older brothers and sisters, I have 2 brothers and a sister. So we all started at the same time. It was not something that I fell into or thought I was going to do until I was like 11. And then by 13, I was all in.
And was it because, I just say kids tend to be attracted to things that they're really good at? Did you knew you were better than other kids early on?
Right. Yeah. So my first national championship was when I was 13.
And you went to the Olympics in 1984. I remember that Olympics, the Mary Lou Retton Olympics.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So tell us about that experience.
It was in the United States, and at first I thought that I kind of got gypped because I didn't get to go to somewhere exotic. But in retrospect, it was great. It was the first time my coach, my parents, and any of my family were able to come to one of the international matches. And so being able to compete in the home country where people could show up, I was favored to win. And for the most part, if I didn't win, it would have been a real disappointment. But growing up, my mentors were previous gold medalists or people who were very close friends to them. And there was just an expectation. If you made the United States shooting team, you better win.
So did you sleep well the night before? That's a lot of pressure.
It wasn't horrible. But I was up early, but it wasn't, I got decent sleep. And so I had competed in the Pan American Games, in World Championships, in what is now the World Cup circuit. And so NCAAs had won the NCAA championships at that year as well. There were a lot of high pressure matches. So this was just an additional high pressure match. And I I really prepared to be nervous versus thinking I could calm myself down.
I think that's an important thing for the general public, I guess, like me, to understand, is that for someone who's like competing at the international level, the Olympics is just another international competition.
Yeah. It's a really important one, but among important ones, World Championships, NCAA, the Olympics, they're almost on par. It's because of the level of competition that we faced.
And had you just finished your freshman year of college?
Correct.
And you mentioned that your parents hadn't been able to go to other international competitions. So had you gone to exotic places?
Oh, yeah. I traveled to 25 countries, many of those more than once. I was in Venezuela, Norway, Korea, Brazil, Mexico, East Germany, Russia, England,
Wow.
Germany, Austria, Hungary. Yeah, it was a great way to go through college.
And again, forgive me for not knowing this. After you won the Olympic gold, you continued to compete on the international circuit throughout college?
Yeah, through college, through up until 88.
Okay.
And then my first child was born, and it became unimportant.
And you made your way up to Alaska to do your graduate?
Yeah, mostly I met a guy.
Who was from Alaska?
Yeah. And then, so I got married, got my master's, had 3 kids, and started working at the university.
And stayed at the university for
34 years.
Yeah.
And you can minus the state service when I was at OMB and Ledge Finance.
I want to talk about your time at OMB and Ledge Finance. But what we could do is just talk about leaving the university now, because when will be your last day?
End of May.
End
like
of May.
23rd is my hopeful date, but I can be flexible depending. They're searching right now for a permanent president. And
what are your feelings about leaving?
There's excitement, but also very bittersweet because it's, literally where my kids grew up. It was pretty much my entire career beyond the state service, but the state service was a bit an extension of it. And it just, to me, what the university system brings to the state is so valuable. And I feel really good that we've gotten the reputation back and enrollment's growing. We've had the highest externally funded research volume ever in the last year. So we're on a good pace, and I just want to leave it in a stable financial position so that whoever comes next can capitalize on that momentum that we've had.
Do you have any plans for
grandkids and fishing in July, hunting at Thanksgiving time, family? We have my mom's 90th birthday is in August. We're going to have a family reunion.
Is she in Montana?
She is. Yeah, it's still in the house where I grew up
Wow.
in. Yeah.
So you went to work for the Walker administration at the start of this administration as the OMB director.
Correct.
And I guess talk about the decision to take that job and what you thought the job would be and what the job actually was.
Brian Rogers was the chancellor at University of Alaska Fairbanks, and I was the vice chancellor for administration. So had the power plant and all the business stuff, all the HR stuff, all the finance stuff. Kind of like a city manager for UAF. And Brian had been a legislator in his early days, and he was active in the Walker and Malott transition. And the OMB director at the time retired. And Brian said to me, Pat, there are not a lot of people that can step into that job and hit the ground running, but you're one, and so it's your turn. I'm like, oh, Brian, it's in Juneau. I'll have to take a pay cut. It rains in Juneau. But it was really, it's like, it's your turn. You need to serve the state. You can do this. So I interviewed on a Saturday, was offered the job On Monday, it was announced Tuesday, and on Wednesday was my last day at UAF. Then I drove to Juneau.
Wow.
Started on the next Monday. So this is Thanksgiving Day to the Monday. So it was a super fast transition. But when I was walking around downtown Juneau with my tennis shoes and no socks in January, drinking coffee, and it wasn't 30 below, I was like, Juneau's not too bad. But I didn't know the job. So I came in and learned very fast. In the first year, we did 4 different budgets because of a myriad of no CBR vote and the like. In the first year, the price of oil had tanked. Fortunately, there was a lot of savings. We had $17 billion in savings. Thank goodness for the prior administration for leaving that. There was annual revenue covered less than 20% of the spend that year. So 83% of our budget was covered by the CBR. Well, not the CBR. At that point, it was the SBR. But the reserves. That was my first year.
And I think that's, obviously, we don't have a savings like that.
No.
We've spent...
No, and we started saying, we can only do this a couple of times, but we have to address it. And so I think the biggest accomplishment was the percent of market value legislation, but we worked hard on revenue measures. We worked hard on limiting the amount of the dividend so you could secure the dividend long term. But we have models, and I could pull those models up today, say you're going to run out of the CBR if you don't address this. And you know what? It's exactly as we predicted it.
So I'm curious about running a state's budget and making the decision to take 83% of your budget from savings, and just what the negotiations were like and what your thoughts were and what made you lose sleep at night about doing that, if you did.
I don't lose sleep.
As we've learned from the night before the Olympics.
Yes, I don't lose sleep. But we reduced the spending that same year by over 40% from the year before. So it came together, both reduce spending and address revenue. But I joked that we were trying to solve a math problem and legislators were trying to solve a re-election problem. And the big dividend was not something people felt like they could give on, that they had to have a big dividend. Well, we couldn't afford it. And so that one year after the legislature passed, the budget it was much higher than what we had put forward. The governor vetoed the dividend down to 1,000, vetoed the community assistance deposit, and several other areas. It's school debt reimbursement. It said we can't do business as usual. And it was in an attempt to say we can't afford what we've been doing. We have to do this differently. Politically, we learned a lot there. Probably wasn't the best strategy, but it did communicate the urgency of where we were. And I think faced with the same circumstances, I think the governor would have made those same choices. But being part of the discussion around the choices, the impact, and then between Randy Hoffbeck, Chris Laddick, and myself, we did more than 500 town halls to explain the financial situation of the state and how upside down we were and the choices that we faced, and to discuss revenue opportunities. And I think in retrospect, we had our fiscal plan was too complicated. It needed to be simpler. But, again, you're making the best decisions you can at the time.
Well, I've only had one other OMB director on the podcast, and that was Donna Ardoin, who came after you. And I think when you talk about legislators thinking about reelection, whereas you guys were solving a math problem, Governor Walker lost the reelection. There were other folks who lost. And then flash forward to 2026, and the governor's put forward a budget that has a full PFD in it, a budget just drastically in the red. And so when I think about what some people's lessons learned were is that no matter what, you have to have a big PFD. And
I actually think the vast majority of the people in the state realize that arguing for a big dividend is not in the best interest of the state. Yes, a dividend, but it has to be modest because you have to afford these other things. And do you want a tax to have a dividend? Because that's the alternative. And so I think at least in the time that has passed, the legislators will not get reelected if they give a big dividend because people know it's irresponsible. And, it only took 12 years, but hey, we got there. But it takes a long time for people to really get the message. So I think, we're in a better position. But if there's a dividend, you're going to have a revenue measure. There's just where we are with oil. And as much as the oil production might come up, we don't recoup any annual revenue for that for at least 7 years after it starts. And that's after the oil starts coming because of the capital credits that exist. That's not a panacea. That's not going to save. Oil is not going to save us. Oil price might extend the problem for a year, but that's not going to save us.
Well, I was about to say those 500 town halls were in vain, but it sounds like the 500 town halls laid the foundation for folks to come around maybe 12 years later.
Yeah, and I think even when the governor put forward the full PFD, except for 1 year when oil was over 100 and we were in COVID disaster, the legislature moderated that dividend down to 1,700. So the message, when the legislature makes those calls, that the people are behind them because they won't make those calls if the people aren't behind them. So it actually happened in year 5 where there was realization now, but it still sucks the air out of the room every time you have budget closure because that can be $1 billion, it could be $2 billion, it could be $3 billion. And you want $1 billion deficit, you want a $2 billion deficit, or you don't want a $3 billion deficit. It really is, people are getting the math as well as the dynamic.
I want to talk about healthcare. I just interviewed an ASD teacher last night talking about ASD has a $90 million shortfall. They've basically spent from their savings for the past couple of years, and now they're out of savings. Right. So now they're facing this huge shortfall. And what was interesting was that she said that she's been in the classroom for 50 years, but she's like, I'm fine. But there are younger teachers here, some of whom have families, their insurance premium every month is over $1,000. She's like, I just don't feel like people are talking about it. That is a really big issue, that we have a lot of employees in the state who are paying really big health insurance premiums every month. And we know that businesses that try to provide health insurance for their employees, that it's their biggest expenditure. What I've said is that I want to use the same arguments that folks who want to put a spending cap on the state on us, say like, well, we can't have unfettered growth in spending. We have to learn to live with our means. So, well, we need to tell that to the healthcare system. But bouncing back, so you were OMB director. There were attempts to reform healthcare in Alaska. Talk about just what brought that on and what that process was like.
Again, it's been the fastest growing cost, and it affects the retiree health care, employee health care, school district health care, Medicaid, all of those have a portion of state general fund behind them. And as a state, we have tremendous amount of public funded health care. And and again, it was the fastest rising cost, but it's critically important. And there is a balance. But in our mind, we were setting ourselves up to take advantage of a second term to deal with it because it isn't popular. Actually, my son is one of those young teachers at ASD, as a chemistry teacher at South. And it is an issue. What you think about the issue for somebody on the private healthcare market. The report came out last week at the Economic Development Luncheon. The tax credit impact for families, $120,000. It hits the state $38 million taken out of discretionary funding because of that tax change for covering your personal health insurance. So it's ubiquitous, but how do you solve it when you have so many interests? And what we were looking for first was like a healthcare authority where we could collect the data and information that would show that. And we did some studies, and they're still valid. The information's valid. The price tag is different. But the distribution of who's paying for healthcare in the state was super valuable report. We were going from there, and then we were going to how could we have Alaska Care have a larger purchasing power footprint by allowing other entities come in. Just we've got retirees and we've got state employees, but universities, school districts, do they have an option? But the only way you can do that is if you have individual employer risk pools, because an employer has to take responsibility for their own claims. So we were looking at those possibilities. We were looking at how do we take the employee insurance functions and Medicaid and be able to leverage the information and the buying power. What could we do there? And we had a great group. We had representatives, we had senators, we had all of the key departments, and we had several public members. And going through the discussion, and the principle was we can't just have the balloon and we squeeze the balloon and somebody else is paying for it. How do we reduce the cost? Because we don't want to just do cost shifts.
Right.
We want to figure out how to reduce the cost. And so another was the more proactive preventative care approach. But unless it's a administrative priority and you have willing partners, you can't start the discussion. And politically, it's difficult. There's a lot of forces against it. And so again, that it was a good second term thing. And but the costs are tremendous.
What I've said a few times, I've been thinking about this for a couple of years and talking to people about it, is that if we want healthcare to cost less, people somewhere in that system are going to have to make less money. You know what I mean? Like if we want to pay less, some entity is going, well, and as you just said about the balloon, we don't want to just find one entity and have them make less money. We need to even the playing field, so to speak, in terms of how we're going to do it. But I almost think there's some analogy to be made with the PFD and people wanting to continue to get something that they've always gotten. And I feel like the solution has always been pour more money in, and that will get us to next year. But then the problem is that next year there's expectation that even more money will be poured in. And I think we're at the breaking point. Like we can't just keep pouring enormous amounts of money in to a dysfunctional overpriced system. We need to fix the system and lower the prices. But there are some folks who are making big profits off Alaska's healthcare system. And I don't know, I feel like I get into a dangerous area when I start talking about it.
Yeah. And you would be surprised. You would be surprised when you talk about that profit, how much of the problem that accounts for is in the less than 5%. So it isn't just that. It's all right, what are we prescribing? All right, what is it if we have the MRIs? And you know, when something is painful, you want an MRI that you show up to and not wait a month.
Right.
And so it's access. And so it isn't as simple as fixing it with a profit.
I think the pushback that you hear for folks who say that the education system is bloated, that there's room for cuts, they're always saying, well, there's too much money going to administration. I would love to see how much of our healthcare money is going to administration. And is there room to cut back on that cost? I don't know.
Yeah. And then, yes, but what happens when a hospital has 2 staph infections? Because the administration that was doing the safety protocols
has been let go.
How much does that cost? So it's all of it has a trade. It's not a simple solution, but it takes a lot of people in the room willing to compromise and also listen and understand both sides of the story.
It's my understanding that 50% of the costs in our healthcare system are people's salaries.
That wouldn't surprise me. I mean, if looking at the university,
right?
I mean, it's the people business,
right?
You don't have care without a nurse assistant. You don't have care without the janitor cleaning up so you don't get a staph infection. It is a people-dependent business. Now, there are a lot more efficiencies like in teledoc and I mean, that's a game changer. And it's a game changer for the patient, too.
Oh, yeah. Patients prefer it.
Yeah,
they don't have to take off work, drive across town, or fly across the state.
Right, to get there. So some of those things are very, very valuable. And then, the just battery of tests that you can get all at once, but then you're paying for that equipment and stuff. But
we're getting near the end of our time. What would you say if someone says, well, maybe what we need to do is build a whole new system? And people say, well, that's impossible. And there's no way that we can keep care going while we're rebuilding a whole system. Where would you say is the biggest bang for our buck in terms of area that needs reform that would actually lower costs?
I don't have a good answer for you. It's going to be a lot of things. And do you talk about a public health care system that's more focused on preventative? Then again, you have this public expectation that, wait a second, I have good insurance and I want to go to the doctor I want to go to. And it's just not going to be a one size fits all. And I don't think it's going to be that you can throw it all up in the air and it's going to come back in certain pieces.
We had a presentation the other night where there was a slide that talked about the problem for a legislature dealing with oil taxes. And what they essentially said was that the industry is always going to have more information than you. And you are going to be asked to trust them when they tell you what's going to be best for your state by helping their industry. And it's gaining enough of your own knowledge to be able to push back on some of that. And I think we see the same thing when we talk about healthcare. When hospital administrators come in, they are telling what we have to do so that our hospitals can continue. When we have specialists come in, they say what we need to do to tweak the law to allow them to bill more for certain services so that they can continue to offer these services. What we don't ever have is anyone coming in and saying, you can cut here. I don't need more money here. No one ever says that.
No.
And I don't know that we ever have enough folks in the building with any knowledge to push back on that. And so I feel like we are at the mercy of stakeholders, I guess, for lack of a better word, in terms of their expertise far outweighing our expertise, and we have no right to question. And maybe the answer is that we need to hire people who have that expertise, who can see behind the curtain and say, what do the hospitals really need? What do the specialists really need? What do the insurance companies really need? Because depending on the insurance companies, it tells what they really need. Depending on the hospitals, it tells what they really need. Depending on the specialists, it tells what they really need. How do we trust that?
It is not a matter of trust. It's a matter of a legislative body can build policy. And to build policy, you need to start with principles. So starting with your principles and asking the questions, what is the value added? But you're never going to get the precision that a hospital executive is going to have. You're never going to get the precision that an insurance executive is going to have. And the lay legislature has to set the principles and build the policy on the principles. The specifics will be the specifics, and yes, you need to know as much as you can. But you're never going to have enough information to narrow in on something. So you have to do it from a much more umbrella, principled and policy perspective.
Right. It kind of applies to things way outside of healthcare.
Right.
And I guess
or oil tax,
yes.
Whatever. What is it? What are your principles? And then you get into everybody has a different principle.
Well, I guess last question, as you exit running the university system, what are some things that you just want folks to know, whether it be a legislator or just the general public?
Stability, foundational stability for the university system is absolutely essential to our workforce. And in the past few years, we've brought back that stability and that certainty. We've turned enrollment around. We are bucking the tide. Every other state is losing enrollment. We're growing enrollment. And we are 100% focused on growing enrollment, improving retention, and speeding graduation, because that's the state's workforce. But it's creating the foundation of stability for the institution. And, the higher education fund is a key piece of that. But what the university can do with ongoing stability is partner with industries. We're doing that with the construction industry. We're doing that with the oil and gas industry on process technology. We're doing that with the mining industry. We're working with the military on drones, but on just overall national security issues and Alaska's position in the Arctic. There are so many opportunities that with just base stability for the institution, that momentum can continue. Leave one final thought. 80% of the students who graduate from a University of Alaska program, whether it's at UAF, UAA, or UAS, or any of our community campuses, 80% are living and working in the state 1 year after. 75% stay long-term. If a student goes outside to school, only 25% come back. This institution is Alaska's workforce solution from vo-tech all the way up through professional degrees, bar none. And that sense of stability is absolutely critical to keeping the trust in the public, but also to keep that workforce pipeline going.
Hey, one last quick question. When you were here a year ago, we were talking about federal cuts to research programs. Did that money come in, or are we still?
So we had, and I don't quote me on the exact numbers. The dollar numbers right, but the grant numbers. We had 25 grants frozen that were eventually eliminated. The remaining amount on those was $17 million. We had 54 grants frozen that we were able to get unfrozen. Those were worth $77 million. With the federal budget being passed, potentially, the impact to those federal departments that are part of our research portfolio, it's fairly stable. And I think we've weathered that storm. And we're also in a tremendous alignment for the state's economy and interests of the feds in terms of oil and gas, defense military strategy, drones, space, Golden Dome issues, critical minerals, the whole data science, data platforms, and energy. We have capacity and alignment that as those opportunities come through, I think the university is in a great position to be part of this solution.
Well, Pat Pitney, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@aklive.gov or call 907-465-4940.